Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Alara, Director of Instance here, and I'd like to welcome you to our Case Collective webinar series. This is where we get to hear from experts in various areas of our practice as they take you through practical examples and lessons learned on a range of interesting topics involving cases or real-life scenarios. And today, I'm joined by Kerry Darton. So our topic is aged care myths. So our resident mythbuster, or otherwise known as an aged care specialist advisor, Kerry, welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Okay, I've seen you've been busy on LinkedIn. I've seen watching you on LinkedIn, so you're quite active there. What's been happening in the world of aged care before we get into it?
So just recently we've had the change of the pension. So on the 20th of March and 20th of September each year, the age pension is reviewed. So one of the results of that is that it ripples through all of the impacts of the various fees and charges that are associated with aged care, as well as just pension. So that was probably the last big post on LinkedIn we had. There's lots of impact of that because some fees are tied to the single person's pension. So yeah.
So it never ends.
Never ends.
Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about myths, and I know that there's, aged care is a complicated area, and we're going to run through 10 today.
10 today, yeah.
10 today.
In an attempt to make it simple.
In an attempt to make it simple, that's right, to bust some of these myths or to clarify them. Yeah. I suppose part of the process here is we'll just go through these 10, have a discussion around those, and then at the end or all the way through there, that we might be able to answer any questions along the way too.
Happy to answer questions.
So I'm just checking here. Just had a question or up. Is there a sound problem? So I'll just leave that to our marketing person to see if they can work that one out.
Yeah.
So we'll push ahead, and if there is an issue with this, what we'll do, we'll just record this and re-record it. Sorry, and push it out again. So hopefully it'll all sort itself out. All right. So Kerry, number one. These aren't in any particular order, okay. But number one. So first myth is, and
do I get to pass on any of the myths? Is the other thing.
No. Sorry, there's our disclaimers, and we're pushing through this. So our first myth is you don't get your accommodation payment back. Pretty common one.
Okay, so the reason there's a lot of uncertainty around this is in July 2014 the rules changed, and so people have a lot of experience with past bonds and payments to go into aged care. Now you have what's called an accommodation payment, and that's one of 4 fees that you are charged when you go into aged care. And unlike previously, when you paid a bond, there was a portion that would be retained by the aged care facility as a charge. Now it's like when you live outside of a house, outside of aged care. You either live in a house that you've bought or you rent, and in aged care you've got a combination of the two. So you can buy part of the house and rent part of the house. So when we talk about an accommodation payment, we're talking about, you'll hear the term acronym, and I don't like using a lot of acronyms because it gets confusing for people.
Yep.
But you'll hear the term a RAD or a RAC, which is a refundable accommodation deposit or a refundable accommodation contribution. And then that's what the lump sum figure is, and then if you don't pay that full amount, then you can be charged a DAP or a DAC, which is a daily accommodation payment or a daily accommodation contribution.
And there's a high correlation between the two, in that the more that you pay as a lump sum, the lower the daily fee.
Yeah. So the DAP or the DAC, the daily accommodation payment or the daily accommodation contribution, is charged as a percentage of your unpaid RAD, your upfront amount. So whatever the published cost of that bed is, which you can find on www.myagedcare, and aged care facilities are also required to publish that rate. the portion that you don't pay is charged at 4.01% at the moment. If you were to go into aged care today, that's what you would be charged on your unpaid component. So the accommodation payment, people panic. They because it can be $450,000, $650,000. It's quite a significant amount of money, and people think that they're paying that and not getting that back. But it's got a government guarantee, and you can elect to have some fees deducted from that, but that is repaid to the estate as cash upon the person leaving the aged care facility. So you do actually get that money back.
Okay. Well, number 2 is the home is obviously, one of people's greatest assets. So this tends to impact most of your clients.
Yes.
It's a myth that you have to sell the home to access care. This is a pretty important one.
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you take nothing else away from today, if you think you have to sell the house, I suggest it's very important to get advice, because they're well intended. You see this large portion that you need to pay to get access to care. So the immediate reaction is need to sell the house. The unexpected consequence of that is that you can then often lose an age pension, and you can increase means tested fees and things like that. So having to sell the home to pay for access to aged care is not always the best solution. And one of the reasons for that is because the home is an exempt asset from a Centrelink perspective. So it is exempt for 2 years from the date you become a permanent resident. If you've got a spouse who is still in the home, it's an exempt asset for the whole time they're in the home, and then 2 years from when they leave, it's still exempt. So from a Centrelink perspective, if you sell that house and the house is worth $1 million, all of a sudden $1 million worth of assets is counted, and you're potentially going to be going over your thresholds, and you're going to be losing either part or the full age pension. And then from a aged care fee perspective, the house is capped at $173,075.20. So I usually say approximately $173,000. So you can have $1 million house, and it's only the first $173,000 that's assessed when you're calculating the means tested fee. So people think they've got to sell the home, but then they sell the home, and all of a sudden the daily cost of the means tested fee increases significantly, because the full value of the home is being counted, not just up to that capped value.
So we really need to take into consideration the individual circumstances around other assets, the level of
So there's this balance between government support and care fees.
Yep.
And sometimes this is where it's really important to step back, take a breath, have a look at what the implications are. And we tend to run 3 to 5 scenarios for people of what it looks like if we do nothing day one. What does it look like if we sell the house? What does it look like if we rent the house? What does it look like if we leave the house vacant for a period of time? And it also gives people that breather that they've got 2 years before it's going to be negatively impacting on their pensions, and before it starts counting as an asset.
The transaction itself is a significant cost.
Yes.
And there's more to that. So it's usually through a traumatic stage. It's nice to have that breathing space and reassess, what your options are.
Yeah. And from a estate planning point of view as well, we have lots of discussions around estate intentions. Selling the house, sometimes there's the unexpected consequence that somebody's actually being left the house in the will.
Yeah.
If we liquidate that asset and sell it, then it's paid for the accommodation payment, the RAD, and then that's returned to the estate as cash. And so there's lots of selling the home it seems to be people's first step. They think, oh, mum or dad or both have to go into care. The only way we can afford this is to sell the house. But it's actually stepping back and going, actually, how do we access the most government support that we can get? What are the estate intentions, and are we making sure that we don't unwind those estate intentions? And what's the best care for mum and dad, and how can we pay for that going forward? So
I think that's an important point, because most of the time it's children who have powers of attorney here,
yes.
and they have an obligation to consider not just act in their parents' best interest, but also consider the ramifications of their actions.
Yeah. And people have the best intentions. Unfortunately, the consequences can sometimes be that they're unexpected consequences of the decisions.
Okay, number 3, it comes April, so usually a private health fund premium rises. So this is on everyone's radar, as to have a look at it. And this one is you won't need your health fund in aged care. So
okay.
Cutting costs.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Okay, so this is something that we don't advocate necessarily yes or no to having healthcare, but what we do is we talk to people about what's going to be covered when you go into 24/7 care in a residential aged care facility. And so it's not necessarily the case that you need the health fund when you go into care, but one of the things that you've got to look at, and some facilities have ancillary, is that the right
ancillary
word?
benefits?
Services, and
yep.
Like podiatry and stuff that's included, others don't. So you need to understand what is going to be covered from a care and medical perspective, but things that I don't think as a general rule from my experience are covered are things like new dentures, new spectacles, if a hip operation or a knee operation needs to be. So from a health perspective, it's making sure that if you stop that health cover, that they are still going to have access to the specialists or the treatment that they need. But also you don't want, like dentures, I don't know from personal experience, but dentures apparently are quite expensive. So you don't want to be stopping the health fund and then finding within a couple of months of going into care that you're needing to sort of have major dental expenses and things. So it's all about, it's not an automatic, like, yes, they're going into care, but not all health costs are covered under that arrangement. So getting an understanding of what's covered and what the individual's circumstances are going to be or likely to be, and then don't just assume just because they're going to care you can stop the cover.
Yep. So takeaway on that is don't assume, look into what's included, and then make your assessment.
Yeah.
Okay. Myth number 4. To reduce fees, you can just give all your financial assets to your kids.
Okay.
Not uncommon around this one.
We talk about this a lot. Now, it's very hard for me to say that this is a good idea.
Yeah.
So as a financial advisor, telling someone that it's a good idea to give away their assets so that they lose control and access to those assets is not in the best interest of the client. So from that perspective, people that we're dealing with who are going into aged care don't have the ability to go and earn another income or prop up their assets. So to give away those assets is potentially detrimental to them.
I think to support that too, your enduring powers of attorney has the duty of care as well to act in that way.
Yeah. So the enduring power of attorney can't just decide that it's a good idea to give away mum and dad's assets. The other thing is that there's all these rules around giving away funds. So that you can give $10,000 a year, $30,000 over 5 years without it being a deprivation of assets. But if you give more than that away, then it's going to count as an asset because it's deprivation of that asset. So when they're calculating your fees and your access to aged care, they're still going to be counting those amounts that are over $10,000. So if you break it down, so if we break it down, the giving money away, you don't know, even so some people will say, well, I'll give it 5 years before mum and dad go in, and then it doesn't count as deprivation of assets. But the thing is, you don't know what's going to happen in 5 years' time. You don't know what the state of your parents' health is going to be. You don't know what your circumstances are going to be. 5 years is actually quite a long period of time, and people's personal circumstances change. So it may, and the other thing is that you're putting that money at risk. You don't want to think that you're going to be divorced, or that you're going to be a bankrupt, or that you're going to be sued by somebody. So saying, oh, mum and dad, give me your assets and I'll look after you in old age. If you get divorced, you're potentially going to lose half of that asset. If you become a bankrupt, you can lose the whole amount of that asset, sort of thing. So gifting to a third person when you don't have control or access to that, when you could be using that money to access a better quality of care or a more expensive place to stay. And there's also caps and limits in place. So people, when you look at the first year of fees, the means tested fee might be quite significant if you've got a lot of assets. However, there's an annual cap of, again, like there's an exact figure of $28,338.71. So I go approximately $28,000 a year is the maximum means tested fee that you're going to be charged. And then there's a lifetime maximum on that. So giving away assets to reduce those fees, it's sort of counterintuitive, if that's the right word. I'm not very good with my words today, sorry, which isn't good in a webinar. So the lifetime cap is $68,000. So this whole to reduce fees, if you have the means to pay, yes, you have to pay more fees, but giving away the money so that you reduce your fees it's limiting your options. It's putting that money at risk. You don't know what the circumstances are going to be in the future. So what I think is a better thing to do is to actually look at how you structure it, so that, for example, if you're paying $550,000 for your RAD, if you don't pay that, you're paying 4.01%. So if you've given away $500,000 to reduce your fees, you don't have that $500,000 to pay towards your accommodation costs, so you're going to be charged 4.01%. So it's not, people think that, we'll just get rid of all of the assets and it'll reduce the fees. There's still going to be fees. So
yep. And I think one of the key things we do within any of the strategic advice that we deliver is focus on making sure there is flexibility in your strategy.
yes.
And so changing circumstances absolutely does happen and can happen. And making sure that at all times, sometimes it's not always about dollars and cents to the nth degree.
No.
It's about making sure that the intent or the spirit behind your strategy, which is in this case is to care for an individual, is actually fulfilled and carried through.
Yeah. And so it's about the ability of being able to afford the best possible care and leaving those options open. So your parents have worked all of their life and accumulated this wealth. Using some of that so that they have the best life they can possibly have I think is better than giving the finances away.
And I'll just add here, we've got a comment here from Scott, so thank you, Scott, who said there's also a risk of redemption and liability for the attorneys if they give assets away specifically promised in a will. So that's a nice point there. Thank you, Scott. Okay, we'll keep pushing forward. Number 5, if you put in a tax return, you don't need to update Centrelink with any of the change in circumstances. Would be nice, but another one to bust. Yeah,
okay. So this is a big misconception, and I have a lot of people who go, yeah, but mum and dad do their tax returns. Tax returns are about the income that you've earned on your assets. Government support is means tested, and it's about the asset and income test. So as part of being given the government support, whether that's in fees for the aged care facility or the Centrelink age pension, is that you undertake to keep them informed of what assets and income you have. So, and they deem the income. So it's not the actual income that you have earned that you're declaring in your tax return. It's based on the value of the assets, and they deem what those assets can generate as an income. And it's about the way the the government support is provided is based on what assets you have, whether you've sold any of them, what their current value is. So just doing your tax return is not updating Centrelink you're not, what's the word? Sorry. Just putting the tax return, yes, it shows income. The other thing is that it's my understanding that tax office can't just tell the aged care facility what you've put in your tax return, or Centrelink. So there's not that communication across government departments necessarily. The tax return is about your actual income that's generated. Your eligibility for government support, either as an age pension or care fees, is based on what your asset values are and what they can generate, what they deem they can generate income as.
Yep. So clearly there's more to it than just what an income level is. One is the way that they assess your income, and two is the asset base and changes in that impact that as well. All right, number 6. If you don't have the full RAD, you can't afford to go into residential care.
Okay.
So the RAD, just for
the RAD is accommodation.
Refundable accommodation deposit.
And that's like if you are outside of an aged care facility, you either buy a house that you live in, or you rent a house, or you pay. In aged care, you can rent part by part, and that's termed as a RAD. The whole aged care system is means tested. Like the changes in July 2014 went from being a needs-based assessment for paying to a means testing. So if you don't have the full RAD, you can't afford to go to residential care. It doesn't mean if you have the means, you're assessed. If you are assessed as being eligible, so if you've had an ACAT assessment, so I'm throwing in a whole lot of acronyms now, but an ACAT assessment is an aged care assessment team assessment. Too many assessments in that sentence, but anyway, and the government assists with the costs. So if you don't have the money, the government, if you have low or no means, the government will actually pay your RAD, and it becomes what's called a RAC, which is a refundable accommodation contribution. And so then that's based on the facility that you go into, and the government will assist with those costs. So if you don't have the full RAD, you can also pay a partial RAD. And so you and we will have cash flow. We do cash flow with people, so we look at how much you need to pay the fees ongoing, and then we may pay a partial lump sum to the RAD, and then we can deduct some fees from that going forward as well. So it's all about getting that balance between if you don't have means or very low means, the government kicks in a whole lot more. If you do have assets, then there is an expectation, because it's a means tested system, that you contribute to that.
So the key takeaway from just listening there is that your options may be limited, but you will have access to residential care. Yeah,
so you can't. So I've got someone who wants to go into a $1.3 million suite in Melbourne in an aged care facility. If you don't have the means to go into there, you can't be looking at facilities that are $1 million. But there are facilities around, and you can go. There's a couple in Brisbane that at $550,000, they have what's called low means or concessional beds, and the government contributes to that cost. So it's the aged care facilities also get additional funding if they've got more or less than 40% of low means people. So it may be that the facility is actually looking for somebody who is a concessional or low means person, and that there's a bed available. So you don't get just bad facilities if you don't have the funds. You do still can get access to new and refurbished aged care facilities, and so you don't have to have the full RAD, and sometimes you may make a decision not to pay the full RAD even if you have the assets. You may decide for whatever reason that you might want to keep the holiday home because the family have always gone there, and you don't want to liquidate that to pay the full RAD, but you can still afford to go into the care. You just structure it slightly differently.
Seek advice.
Seek advice.
That's
Come
the best
talk to
way.
me.
All right, number 7. Mum doesn't get the full pension, so she only pays 85% of her actual pension.
Okay. So the daily care fee, which is one of the 4 fees that you pay when you go into aged care, is set, and it's tied to the single person's pension. So it's 85% of a single person's pension, and it's currently $52.71 a day, roughly $19,000 a year. When people hear that the daily care fee is 85% of the single person's pension, they go, "Oh yeah, mum's only on a part pension." But it isn't just whether everyone who goes into aged care is charged the daily care fee of $52.71, and that's calculated based on what the single person's pension is. It's not based on whether you're on a part, full or zero pension, and it's just a way of setting that consistency of people accessing care. So everyone's charged the $52.71, and if you don't have, my thinking on this is they don't want to charge you 100% of your pension, because if you have no other assets and all you have is a pension, then you're not going to have anything left over. Whereas this gives you money toward, maybe additional medication or buying a newspaper or things like that. Haircuts, although some facilities do include haircuts in their fees. So it's $52.71, and that's reviewed on the 20th of March and the 20th of September each year. 20th of September last year, because of COVID, was the first time that we didn't have an increase in the age pension since the war, and so it didn't go up on the 20th of September last year. It's just gone up on the 20th of March to the $52.71, and it'll be reviewed again when the pension's reviewed on the 20th of September this year.
Okay, the next myth, important one, because there's emotional decisions and lots of hurdles in people's minds around making these decisions about going into care. This one's, if it turns out that it's not the right decision once you've entered, you can't leave. Okay, so just up front, it's very rare that I've had people who have changed facilities. Like we talk with people about the things that they should be looking at for an aged care facility, and so it doesn't happen very often. But the thing about this is, just because you've made that decision and the person has gone into that care, that does not mean they can't go somewhere else. And last year we talked about, we did a webinar last year on the 10 things to consider before selling your home. And one of them is about having that mental health, and having the person who owns the home being able to return to their home if they want to. So it's leaving that door open for them. So why would you want to change? Why would you want to leave a facility? You may not like that facility. It may have been the best choice at the time, and then after a couple of months you want to change facilities. I've had that happen once, I think, in the last 4 years, that somebody went, "Oh, this really isn't the place that I want mum to be," and we've changed them. But the other circumstances are that someone may go into care because there's no family member, the person who's been helping with the informal care with the mother, circumstances change. They may become unwell and the person has to move into care. That may change in 6 months' time. So the person could actually come out of the aged care facility. It's not a lock-in. You need to give notice. So you can't just go, "Well, I'm leaving tomorrow," but you can actually change your mind. It's not a lock-in and set. You haven't signed up and gone, "Okay, here's all my assets and I don't have any other options." The other thing is that sometimes when someone goes into care, the chances are that their health actually could improve. So once their medication is being regularly taken, their nutrition, so they're eating regularly and things like that,
that it may be that they can then actually move back to their home and look after themselves. So, if it turns out not to be the right decision, the other thing is that someone's personal circumstances may change. So someone in the family may be moving into a new house, and there may be somewhere that mum could then be in a granny flat in their new house and things like that. So I suppose it's not a final decision.
All right, thank you. 2 minutes to go.
How are we going for time?
We're going okay. We'll push these ones through. Number 9, and this is a critical one too, because we often see this question come up, and that's if the family helps to pay the upfront accommodation costs, we will make it more affordable for dad or mum or the family member, and there's some repercussions for that. So do you want to kick this one off? So
the short answer to this is it's best to get advice before you start paying for accommodation costs and how best to structure that. So one of the big unintended consequences of the family paying the accommodation costs is it's then counted as an asset for the person who is in care. So all of a sudden, if the family all decide, okay, there's 5 siblings and they're all going to throw in $100,000 each and pay the $500,000 accommodation costs, Brad, then all of a sudden, mum or dad's assets have increased by $500,000 because the legislation doesn't recognise that that's a loan for the RAD. It treats that RAD as an asset for the person who's in care. So all of a sudden their means tested fee may have been 0. All of a sudden they've got $500,000 worth of asset that they didn't have before. The other thing, so it's around I think we talked about it earlier. The best intentions can sometimes have unintended consequences, and sometimes it's better to help with those ongoing costs rather than paying for the upfront costs. And
I mean, one of those can be that if you have multiple children, and it's often the case that some of the siblings have better cash flow or better asset base and accumulated wealth and can be in a financial position to assist more than others.
Yeah.
So if one happens to pay the RAD or the refundable accommodation deposit upon the parents'
demise,
the RAD is paid back to the estate.
Yes.
So, and the estate will deal with the assets of the individual. So, do you want to talk that through?
Okay. So, what happens? And there has been examples of brothers helping out, not just siblings, but a family member helping out and paying that upfront cost for the room, the bed, the accommodation costs. And then when that person leaves the facility, that money is returned to the estate, and it's returned to the estate as cash, and the cash is then distributed as per the will. Usually, or quite often, more than 50% of the time, when somebody goes into care, they could have dementia, and so they may not have capacity to change the will. So the will may distribute the cash to the grandchildren. So there will be distribution of the house or holiday unit, whatever, to one generation, and then the cash will be distributed somewhere else. And there's no mechanism there for the aged care facility to return the lump sum paid to the person who actually paid it. It's paid back once they receive probate. It's paid back to the estate, and the executor is then bound to distribute it as per the will.
Yeah, so a little bit around the unintended consequences there.
Yeah, and unwinding the state intentions unintentionally. Like, it's just, it seems like the right thing to do at the time, and then what happens is that because the money is returned as cash, and you're talking about large assets being potentially liquidated to pay, or people using a large portion of their cash flow to pay it, and then that's being distributed as per a will. And quite often there hasn't been provision made within the will to get to, there's no expectation of that.
All right. We'll keep pushing ahead just in the interest of time because we're on our 10th one, Kerry. And last but not least, the myth of only sick people going to residential care.
Okay. So yes, a lot of sick people do go to residential care. And I have a lot of people who say, I don't want mum or dad to go and be surrounded by a lot of sick people. But there isn't just sick people in residential care. What happens is sometimes people can operate as an economic unit when there's two of them, and if something happens to one of those people in the couple, then the other person can't actually live independently, and so they move into care. But it may be a mobility issue. It may be that they can no longer cook for themselves or travel, and so it's not necessarily that they're sick. My grandfather went into aged care when my grandmother got sick, so he was eligible from his ACAT assessment to access residential care. He would have been the primary carer. He went into care, and my grandmother, because of my grandmother's dementia, so he could have stayed at home himself, but he chose to be with my grandma. And you know, he was in care for 8 years. He could have chosen to go home after grandma's passing, but he had been there for 5 years by that stage. We had his 100th there, and there was a lady sitting just off from where we were. All the family, and our family can be quite noisy and talk a lot.
Surprising.
Surprise, surprise. And there was this lady all dressed up sitting at the dining room table, and I spoke to her and said, look, I'm sorry if we're being noisy, you look, and she was waiting for her husband who was wheelchair bound to join her for dinner. But she was dressed up, sitting at the table, and looked like she was out at a restaurant. There was nothing wrong with her. She couldn't, I don't know from an ACAT perspective how she was actually deemed to be eligible, that side of it, but both of them were elderly. She obviously couldn't live independently by herself. She was eligible to be in the aged care facility, but she didn't look sick. And one of those things I say to people is they go, oh, we'll wait until things get worse. She's able to function and be part of the community. If you wait until somebody is bedridden when they go to an aged care facility, that would be quite isolating too. So yes, some people are sick when they go, but not everyone who goes is sick or unable to, there are people who just can't live independently for whatever reason. And it may be that they can't cook for themselves because they're not able to control their hands as well as they used to be able to control cognitively. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there's 10 myths that, and certainly as you can see, one is Kerry's very passionate about her work, but there are only 10 myths that have just been put up there. There's obviously the more you listen around this area, you realise there's a lot of complexities, but more importantly, there's no straight right or wrong answers. It depends on, depends on the individual circumstances. And I suppose that's really what we're talking about here, is getting advice. Yep. So, that's one. If there's one take that we want to do, is actually do get advice, because it can be a far better structure, more affordable, and making sure that we get the best outcome for the client. We do have a quick question here before our time's up, and thank you, Greg. And you spoke of 4 fees. Can you recount these, please, Kerry?
Okay. So,
in the interest of time.
In the interest of time, residential aged care there's 4 fees that I talk to people about when they're going into care. So the first one is the accommodation payment, which we've touched on quite a bit today, which is the bed cost of going into the place. The next fee is the daily care fee, and that's the one that's set at $52.71 a day at the moment, and charged to everyone. And that covers your care and your food, things like that. Then you have a means tested fee, and the means tested fee is based on what income and assets that you have as an individual, and there is caps on that. So if you have a significant amount of assets, that means tested fee may be quite high, and it's limited to approximately 28,000 a year. Up to 2.4 years, if you've paid the maximum, you'll reach the lifetime limit, and you don't have to pay that means tested fee anymore. The fourth fee is an additional service fee, and that is like the added extras. When you go, you can sometimes add on added extras like a haircut or wine with dinner, excursions, things like that. So some places will have that charged to you as you use those services. Others will have like, one facility calls it their Dove Care fee. So it's $20 a day that they charge you for access to additional services. Now, in your residential agreement in your agreement for going into residential care, it will list what those services are that you're paying for. So that's the fourth fee.
All right, thanks, Kerry.
Hopefully that answers your question, Greg. If you've got any further questions on that, you can look at my LinkedIn, because I do talk about fees and aged care quite a bit on my LinkedIn profile.
That was really probably where I was going to close this off on, Kerry, is that there's a lot of details there, and you went through a lot of stuff today quite quickly, which is the purpose of the webinar. If people want to get in contact with you, the best way to do that, to have a chat?
So they can either link through LinkedIn, or I'm at Morgan's North Key, so part of the Morgan's network. So and you can also contact us through Vincent's VinLink, or the Vincent's website has the ability to contact us. So there's lots of different ways, but messaging this on LinkedIn or ringing through to reception at Vincent's can put you through to me. Email us.
Yep. Look, we do have to wrap this up, but we have got a few questions that's just been popping through. So what we might do, just for those who have put those questions through there, Kerry, if you'd like to contact Kerry, she'll be happy to respond to those. So apologies, we're out of time, but if you would like to ask those questions directly, you're more than welcome to contact Kerry. Just our number 322 322 4000. So if you want to make a call, we're more than happy to to answer those queries for you. That's all for us today. There are links on the Vincent's website also. Just in respect of, Kerry mentioned, the 10 things to consider when selling a family home, her last webinar, our previous webinars, and more to the Case Collective. Thanks everyone for dialing in, and we look forward to being with you in the future in the next series. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.